On the 27th of October 2025, the Renters' Rights Act received royal assent and became law. The government hailed it as a historic moment, describing it as tearing down the walls of injustice and delivering the security and fairness that renters deserve. The Act is designed to protect 11 million private renters across England from unfair evictions, poor living conditions, and exploitative practices. On paper, it sounds exactly like what's needed. Noble intentions, clear goals, a fairer system for people who've been treated badly by rogue landlords. But here's the uncomfortable reality that's already playing out across London and the rest of the country. The unintended consequences of this law are destroying the rental market. Landlords are fleeing, supply is vanishing, rents are soaring. And the very people the law was meant to protect are ending up significantly worse off. So how did good intentions create a catastrophe? Let's start with what the Act was actually meant to do, because the goals are genuinely admirable. The biggest change is the abolition of Section 21, the so-called no-fault eviction rule that's allowed landlords to end tenancies with just 2 months' notice and no reason given. Section 21 has been one of the leading causes of homelessness in England. Families have been forced out of their homes at short notice, children have had to change schools, and people have lost their communities simply because a landlord decided they wanted their property back or wanted to sell up. The new law ends that entirely. From the moment it comes fully into force, landlords will only be able to evict tenants for specific, legitimate reasons. Rent arrears, antisocial behavior, or genuine cases where the landlord needs to move back in or sell the property. Everything else requires keeping the tenant in place. On top of that, notice periods have doubled from 2 months to 4, giving tenants more time to find somewhere else if they do face eviction. There's a 12-month protection period at the start of every tenancy where landlords can't evict tenants on grounds of selling or moving in, giving people a full year of guaranteed stability. Rent increases are capped at once per year, and tenants have the right to challenge unfair hikes through a tribunal. Landlords can't refuse tenants who have pets without a reasonable excuse, ending blanket bans that forced people to choose between their homes and their animals. The maximum rent advance has been set at 1 month, putting an end to the practice of demanding 6 months up front, which locked out anyone who didn't have thousands of pounds sitting in the bank. And blanket bans on tenants who receive benefits or have children are now illegal, tackling discrimination that's been rampant in the sector for years. It all sounds brilliant if you're a renter who's dealt with dodgy landlords, unfair evictions, or been forced to give up a pet just to secure somewhere to live. The protections are real and the intentions are genuinely good. But there's a fatal flaw at the heart of this law that nobody in government seems willing to address, and it's this. The Act focuses entirely on tenant rights and completely ignores the supply equation. It assumes that landlords will simply comply, absorb the costs, accept the increased risks, and carry on renting out properties as normal. But that's not what's happening, not even close. They're leaving en masse. 67% of landlords across the UK say they're planning to either exit the rental market entirely or significantly reduce the number of properties they own in 2025. In London, it's even worse. 42% are planning to leave the market completely. 90% say they have no confidence whatsoever in the future of the rental sector. Only 2% are planning to expand their portfolios. 2%. The rest are either stuck where they are or actively trying to get out. And here's the paradox that nobody in Westminster seems to grasp. Protecting tenants is pointless if you remove the homes they need to rent. You can write all the rights you want into law. But if there are no properties available, those rights are worthless. Rights without supply equals worse outcomes for everyone, and the numbers prove it's already backfiring. Over 50,000 rental properties were removed from the UK market in 2024 alone. In the first quarter of 2025, 15.6% of all property sales across the country were former rental properties, up from 9.8% at the same time the previous year. That's a 60% increase in landlord exits in just 12 months. A survey by the Family Building Society found that 4 out of 5 mortgage brokers believe the Renters' Rights Act will accelerate landlord exits even further. And they're right. Landlords are looking at the new rules and deciding the risks simply aren't worth it anymore. Without Section 21, they lose flexibility. Every eviction, even for entirely legitimate reasons like rent arrears or antisocial behavior, now requires going through the courts. 4-month notice periods double the time they're exposed to risk if a tenant stops paying or causes problems. There's a 12-month ban on reletting if they sell, which means they can't even use the property for its intended purpose for an entire year after regaining possession. Mandatory pet allowances increase the risk of damage, and all of this is happening whilst mortgage costs have tripled and rental yields have collapsed to 3 or 4% in London. It's too much risk for not enough return, and the data shows landlords are voting with their feet. Google Trends data reveals that demand for buy-to-let mortgages in January 2025 was at its lowest level in 5 years. People aren't entering the market. They're fleeing it, and once they're gone, they're not coming back. You can't reverse this. Once a landlord sells a property to an owner-occupier, that home is gone from the rental market permanently. And when landlords leave, supply vanishes. London's rental stock has fallen by 41% since the pandemic began. The total number of available properties currently sits at 284,000, down 23% compared to pre-pandemic levels. Across the UK as a whole, there were 276,000 rental properties available in July 2024, compared to 369,000 in July 2019. That's a 25% drop in just 5 years. Meanwhile, demand is 30% above pre-pandemic levels. The build-to-rent sector, which is supposed to be filling the gap left by exiting landlords, isn't even close to keeping pace. There's a net loss of over 150,000 rental homes nationally, even with institutional investment coming in. The result is competition unlike anything the market has ever seen. There are now 10 applications for every property that comes on the market, double the pre-pandemic norm of 5. Prospective tenants are engaging in bidding wars for rentals, offering to pay more than the asking rent just to secure a property. Some are offering 6 months' rent up front, despite the new law banning landlords from asking for it, because they know if they don't, someone else will. The law removed supply at the worst possible time, and the consequences are playing out exactly as critics warned they would. Which brings us to the third unintended consequence. Rents are soaring. The average rent in London currently sits somewhere between 2,200 and 2,700 quid a month, depending on which data source you use. By the end of 2026, forecasts from every major property analyst suggest that figure will break through £3,000. Rents are up 40% since the pandemic, despite house prices actually falling. The forecasts for the next 12 months predict increases of at least 3 to 4%, and that's a conservative estimate. The reason is simple. Supply is shrinking, demand is sustained, and landlords who remain in the market are raising rents to cover increased costs and risks. Industry experts warned this would happen. The Family Building Society stated outright that the Act will accelerate landlord exits and rents will increase across the board. They were right. 46% of rental properties in London now cost over 1,500 quid a month. 15% cost over 3,000. The average rent agreed on a new tenancy is £1,767, a figure that's unaffordable for the majority of working Londoners. The people the law is meant to protect are paying more than they ever have, and it's only getting worse. And if you think the situation is bad now, wait until the court system collapses under the weight of the new eviction rules. Right now, the average time it takes to evict a tenant through the courts is 33.8 weeks. That's almost 8 months. And that's with Section 21 still available, which is supposed to be the quick route. Once the Renters' Rights Act comes fully into force and Section 21 is abolished, every single eviction will have to go through the courts. The Law Society president, Mark Evans, has warned that the courts simply aren't ready for the volume of cases that's coming. The National Residential Landlords Association has described it as an inevitable avalanche of possession claims that the system can't handle. And the data backs them up. Ministry of Justice figures show that court demand has actually fallen by 9%, yet processing times are still increasing. The system is already broken, and it's about to be hit with exponentially more cases. What does this mean in practice? A landlord with a tenant who stopped paying rent will wait 8 to 9 months minimum before they can regain possession. A landlord dealing with a tenant causing antisocial behavior disturbing neighbors, or damaging the property will wait 8 to 9 months before the courts act. A landlord who needs to sell the property will face 8 to 9 months of court delays, plus the 4-month notice period, meaning over a year before they can access their own asset. And it gets worse. The Act increases the rent arrears threshold from 2 months to 3 before eviction proceedings can begin. Tenants can make partial payments just before the hearing to avoid eviction, resetting the clock and forcing landlords to start the process again. The result is that landlords are bearing massive financial risk with no quick recourse when things go wrong. And this creates perverse incentives that hurt the very people the law is supposed to protect. Landlords can't easily remove bad tenants anymore, so they've become ultra-selective about who they'll accept. If you're self-employed and can't prove a regular income easily, you're out. If you're on benefits, even though discrimination is now technically illegal, landlords will find other reasons to turn you down. If you've got a poor credit history, you don't stand a chance. If you've got children, despite the law banning discrimination, landlords are suddenly concerned about wear and tear or noise complaints. If you've got a pet, despite the new rights, landlords are still deeply reluctant because they know damage claims and disputes take months to resolve. And if you can't offer 6 months rent up front, despite the law saying landlords can't demand it, you're competing against tenants who are offering it voluntarily just to get ahead of the queue. The law was meant to protect vulnerable renters. Instead, it's made it significantly harder for them to rent at all. Only perfect tenants with spotless records, high incomes, and cash reserves get properties now. Everyone else is shut out. Irwin Mitchell, a major law firm, has warned that the PET provisions lack clarity and will inevitably cause disputes that clog the courts even further. Letting agents are worried that 22% of tenants are planning to appeal all rent rises, regardless of whether they're fair, just to test the system and drag things out. And agents themselves are losing revenue because renewal fees, which accounted for 27% of their income nationally and 37% in London, are disappearing with the shift to periodic tenancies. The entire ecosystem is breaking down, and the people caught in the middle are renters who just want somewhere stable and affordable to live. The people being hurt most by this law are small landlords, and that matters more than you might think. 45% of landlords in the UK own just one rental property. They're accidental landlords who inherited a property, or people who kept their old home when they moved, or retirees who bought a second property as a pension investment. They're not wealthy property tycoons. They're ordinary people, and they can't absorb what this law demands of them. They can't handle 8-month court delays whilst mortgage payments pile up. They can't afford professional legal costs for every eviction. They can't survive months of no rent coming in whilst a tenant disputes the case. They can't pay £10,000 to £25,000 to upgrade properties to EPCC ratings. They can't take on the risk of mandatory pet allowances and the damage that might come with them. Large institutions can handle all of this. They've got legal teams, cash reserves, and the scale to spread risk across hundreds or thousands of properties. Small landlords don't. They can't compete, so they're selling. The result is consolidation. Big landlords get bigger. Small landlords exit, and ironically, the build-to-rent institutions, the corporate landlords, are the ones who benefit. The mom-and-pop landlords who provided affordable, flexible housing are being destroyed. They're being replaced by corporate landlords with higher rents, stricter rules, and no personal relationship with tenants. The law was supposed to protect renters from exploitation. Instead, it's handing the market to exactly the kind of large, impersonal landlords that renters dislike most. And the timing of all this couldn't be worse. The Act is expected to come fully into force sometime in spring or summer 2026, likely around May. That's right when 1.4 million mortgages across the UK are rolling off fixed rates. Landlords are already being crushed by mortgage costs that have tripled since 2022. Now they're facing a regulatory straitjacket that removes their ability to quickly regain possession if things go wrong. It's a perfect storm of financial pressure and regulatory restriction hitting at exactly the same time. The government rushed the implementation. They wanted it done before the end of 2025 originally. Industry bodies begged for a minimum of 6 months lead time to prepare, but the government hasn't confirmed that. There's no proper transition period for existing tenancies. They'll all convert to the new system on the same day. Landlords have just weeks or months left to serve Section 21 notices under the old rules before that option disappears forever. The result is a rush to exit before they get trapped in the new system. In 2024, 32,287 Section 21 notices were filed, the highest number in 8 years. The preemptive exodus is accelerating, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. So what should the government have done instead? Address supply first, rights second. Build more homes before restricting landlords. You can't protect tenants if there are no homes for them to rent. Incentivize landlords to stay in the market rather than driving them out with punitive regulations and tax changes. Phase in the changes over years, not months, giving landlords time to adapt and the market time to adjust. Increase court capacity before changing eviction rules. Hire more judges, open more courtrooms, streamline processes. You can't abolish Section 21 without a functioning alternative, and right now, the courts can't cope. Offer tax breaks for good landlords who maintain properties well and treat tenants fairly, instead of punishing everyone equally. Provide support for EPC upgrades through grants or loans, not just mandates. Threatening landlords with fines doesn't create better housing. Helping them afford improvements does. And whatever you do, don't introduce rent controls. The evidence from cities around the world is clear. Rent controls reduce supply, discourage investment, and make shortages worse. Sweden has had strict rent controls and strong tenant rights for decades, and the result has been a 20-year housing shortage with waiting lists stretching into the thousands. Germany relaxed its rent control laws in 2015, specifically because supply had collapsed and builders weren't willing to invest. London needed a carrot and a stick. Instead, it got only a stick. The result is exactly what you'd expect. Landlords leave, supply vanishes, rents rise, and tenants suffer. The Renters' Rights Act 2025 received royal assent on the 27th of October with a noble goal: protect 11 million renters from unfair evictions, poor conditions, and exploitation. Nobody disputes that renters deserve better. But the reality of this law is that it's making the crisis catastrophically worse. Landlords are fleeing the market. 67% are exiting or reducing their portfolios, and 90% have no confidence in the sector's future. Supply is collapsing. 50,000 properties were removed from the market in 2024 alone, and the pace is accelerating. Rents are soaring. The average London rent is heading toward £3,000 a month by the end of next year. The courts are broken, 8-month waits for evictions now, and it's about to get exponentially worse. Vulnerable tenants are hurt most because landlords won't risk taking them on when removing bad tenants is nearly impossible. Small landlords are being destroyed because they can't absorb the costs and risks. And the timing is a disaster, with mortgage rate resets and regulatory cliffs hitting simultaneously. The fatal flaw at the heart of this law is simple. Rights without supply equals failure. You can write all the protections you want into legislation, but if you destroy the rental market in the process, those protections become meaningless. You can't protect tenants by driving landlords out. You can't help renters by removing the homes they need. And you can't fix a housing crisis by making it harder to provide housing. Good intentions aren't enough when you ignore basic economics. Supply and demand aren't political concepts. They're realities that don't care about your policy goals. When you reduce supply whilst demand stays high or increases, prices go up. It's that simple. And it's exactly what's happening. London's rental market needed reform. There's no question about that. Too many tenants have been treated poorly. Too many families have faced evictions with no warning. Too many people have lived in substandard conditions with landlords who ignored complaints. But this isn't reform, this is demolition. The rental market that existed, flawed as it was, is being systematically destroyed. And what's replacing it is worse for almost everyone involved. Tenants are paying more, competing harder, and losing options. Landlords are losing money and getting out. Communities are being hollowed out as people are forced to leave. The city is losing the workers it needs because they can't afford to live here anymore. When will politicians learn that removing homes doesn't help renters, it condemns them? The answer, apparently, is not yet.